He was just a kid who loved sports. Then cancer took his leg. But it couldn't take his courage. This is Terry Fox. In 1977, at only 18 years old, Terry Fox was diagnosed with bone cancer. His right leg was amputated. Most people would have given up on big dreams. But Terry wasn't most people. In the hospital, surrounded by children fighting cancer, he saw their pain and made a vow. He would run across Canada on one leg to raise money for cancer research. Not for himself, but for them. In 1980, Terry dipped his artificial leg into the Atlantic Ocean and began his marathon of hope. Every day, he ran a marathon, 26 miles, through wind, rain, blisters, and agony. People lined the streets, crying, cheering, handing him coins. His struggle became their hope. After 143 days and 5,373 kilometers, Terry collapsed. The cancer had spread to his lungs. With tears in his eyes, he said, "I'm not quitting. My run has just been interrupted." Terry Fox passed away at 22, but his dream never stopped. Every year, millions run in his name, raising hundreds of millions for cancer research. One young man, running on one leg, lit a flame of hope that still burns across the world. He was born in a log cabin, rose from nothing, and saved a nation torn apart. This is Abraham Lincoln. Born in 1809 in rural Kentucky, Lincoln grew up poor, teaching himself to read by candlelight. With little schooling, he dreamed of something greater, to serve his country. Through determination and honesty, he became a lawyer, then a politician. In 1860, against all odds, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. But his nation was breaking. 11 southern states seceded, and the Civil War began. Lincoln carried the unbearable weight of leading a country at war with itself. He fought not just to preserve the Union, but to end slavery. In 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in the South free. It was a turning point in the fight for justice, a promise of a better America. Victory was near, but on April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning, the first U.S. president to be assassinated. From humble beginnings to a martyr for freedom, Lincoln proved that one person's courage can hold a nation together. His words, "A new birth of freedom," still echo today. To some, he was a savior. To others, a monster. This is of Pancho Villa. Born Doroteo Arango in 1878. His childhood was marked by poverty and violence. After killing a wealthy landowner who attacked his sister, he vanished into the mountains, reborn as Pancho Villa. He became a feared outlaw. Trains were robbed, estates were raided, and enemies disappeared. But unlike ordinary bandits, Villa shared his spoils with the poor, which made him both loved and hunted. When revolution ignited in 1910, Villa turned his ruthless skills into strategy. He built the División del Norte, the largest revolutionary army in Mexico. His men were loyal, his enemies terrified. He burned towns that resisted, executed traitors, and struck fear across the nation. Villa even invaded the United States in 1916, raiding Columbus, New Mexico. It was the first foreign attack on American soil in decades. And it made him an international villain to some, a legend to others. But power breeds enemies. In 1923, while driving through Parral, Villa was ambushed in broad daylight. His car was riddled with bullets. The rebel of the revolution died in a storm of gunfire. Bandit, hero, killer, savior, Pancho, Villa was all of them, and his shadow still haunts the deserts of Mexico.
He dreamed of a free Belize and spent his life making it real. This is George Cadle Price. Born in 1919 in Belize City, George grew up witnessing colonial rule under the British. From a young age, he believed his country deserved independence, dignity, and a voice of its own. Price became a teacher, but soon realized that education alone couldn't free his people. He entered politics, leading the People's United Party, and became the driving force behind Belize's push for self-governance. Through decades of protests, negotiations, and speeches, Price inspired Belizeans to unite. He faced opposition, colonial obstacles, and international pressure, but he never wavered. His vision was clear: an independent, proud Belize. In 1981, Belize finally gained independence from Britain. George Cattle Price became the nation's first prime minister. He had achieved what many thought impossible: freedom for his people. Price passed away in 2011, but his dream lives on. Known as the father of the nation, he taught Belizeans that courage, unity, and determination can change the course of history.
He stood with 30,000 warriors against the might of Spain. His name lives forever, Lempira. In the early 1500s, as Spanish conquistadors spread through Central America, the Lenca people faced destruction, but one man rose to unite them: the warrior Lempira. Lempira gathered tens of thousands of fighters from the mountains of western Honduras. They fought back with spears, arrows, and courage against guns, horses, and steel. For years, his resistance slowed the Spanish advance. Lempira and his army held a stronghold at Pinal de Circuin. The Spanish tried again and again to take it, but his warriors stood firm, defying an empire that conquered continents. Finally, the Spanish trick him. Legend says they invited him to a meeting under truce, then shot him. Without their leader, the Lenca resistance fell. But Lempira had proven the empire was not invincible. Today, Lempira is Honduras' national hero. His name lives on in towns, mountains, even the currency. More than a warrior, he became a symbol of resistance, pride, and the unbreakable spirit of his people. He fought for the poor against the powerful, and gave his life for justice. This is Farabundo Martí. Born in 1893 in El Salvador, Martí grew up in a country where a handful of elites owned almost all the land. The poor worked, suffered, and starved, while the rich grew richer. Martí became a student activist, then a communist organizer. He spoke for peasants and workers, calling for land reform and dignity. His voice gave hope to thousands who had none. In 1932, Martí helped lead a peasant revolt against the dictatorship. Armed mostly with machetes, the poor rose up against soldiers and landowners, but the government responded with brutal violence. The rebellion was crushed. The army massacred tens of thousands of peasants in what became known as La Matanza. Martí himself was captured and executed. He was only 39 years old. Farabundo Martí became a martyr for the people. Decades later, his name inspired the FMLN, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. To this day, he stands as a symbol of resistance, justice, and the fight for the poor in El Salvador. He gave a voice to the people of Guatemala and won the Nobel Prize for it. This is Miguel Angel Asturias. Born in 1899 in Guatemala City, Asturias grew up surrounded by Mayan legends and the struggles of his country. These stories shaped his imagination and his mission. He studied law, then literature in Paris, where he absorbed European ideas. But he never forgot Guatemala. He began writing about dictatorship, injustice, and the magic of his homeland. In 1946, he published El Señor President, a novel exposing the brutality of dictatorship. It shocked readers and gave a voice to the silenced. His books blended Mayan myths, political struggle, and surreal style, making him one of Latin America's first magical realists. Asturias also served as a diplomat, representing Guatemala abroad, but political upheavals forced him into exile, proving that his fight against oppression was not just in books, but in life itself. In 1967, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, the first Guatemalan to receive it. Miguel Angel Asturias showed the world that stories could fight tyranny, preserve culture, and inspire generations. He was just a poor drummer boy, but his courage saved a country. This is Juan Santamaria. Born in 1831 in Alajuela, Costa Rica, Juan grew up with nothing. He worked odd jobs, lived in poverty, but he carried a quiet bravery in his heart. In 1856, a foreign army led by the American filibuster William Walker threatened to conquer Central America. Costa Rica rose up to defend itself, and Juan, just a teenager, a drummer boy, joined the fight. At the Battle of Rivas, Walker's men hid inside a stronghold, raining bullets on the Costa Ricans. The army couldn't advance. Then Juan stepped forward. Torch in hand, he ran through enemy fire, set the building ablaze, and turned the battle. Juan was struck down, but his sacrifice changed history. Costa Rica was saved, and Juan Santamaria, the poor boy with nothing, became the nation's greatest hero. To this day, every April 11th, Costa Ricans honor him, the drummer boy who gave everything for his country's freedom. They say words can build worlds, and one man gave Spanish poetry new life. This is Rubén Darío. Born in Nicaragua in 1867, Darío was writing verses before most children could even read. He carried a fire in his soul, a desire to capture beauty, love, and music in words. In a time when poetry felt rigid, Darío broke the chains. He created Modernismo, a movement filled with color, rhythm, and elegance. His verses spoke of swans, dreams, and distant stars, a world where poetry felt alive again. Darío wandered through Latin America and Europe, leaving behind poems like Azul and Prosas Profanas. Each page shimmered like a painting. Each line carried the heartbeat of a new century. For Darío, poetry wasn't just writing, it was breathing. He wove love, sorrow, and wonder into every stanza, showing that language itself could be music. When he died in 1916, his people draped his coffin with a silver swan, the symbol of his art. To this day, Rubén Darío remains the eternal romantic, the poet who gave Spanish wings to fly toward beauty and dreams. He fought for the rights of his people and shaped the future of Panama. This is Justo Orozmena. Born in 1817 in Panama City, Orozmena grew up under colonial rule. From a young age, he understood that Panama's people needed representation, laws, and a voice in their own governance. Orozmena studied law and became a brilliant writer and politician. He drafted ideas that defended regional autonomy, equality, and the protection of local rights, long before Panama was independent. Through speeches, writings, and political action, Orozmena argued that Panama deserved self-governance while remaining part of a larger federation. His work laid the foundation for the country's legal and political identity. Justo Orozmena is remembered as the father of Panamanian nationality, a thinker, lawyer, and visionary, who gave his people the tools to govern themselves and inspired generations to come. He dared to challenge the system, reshaped Bahamian politics, and became a symbol of resilience. This is Sir Cecil Wallace Whitfield. Born on March 20th, 1930, in Nassau, Sir Cecil was a man of humble beginnings. Educated at the University of Hull, he returned to the Bahamas with a vision for change. Initially a member of the Progressive Liberal Party, PLP, he served as Minister of Education under Prime Minister Lyndon Pindling. However, in 1970, disillusioned by the government's direction, he resigned, leading a group of MPs, known as the Dissident Eight, to form a new political movement. On October 20th, 1971, Wallace Whitfield and his colleagues founded the Free National Movement, FNM, aiming to provide a viable alternative to the ruling party. Despite electoral challenges, his leadership laid the groundwork for the FNM's future success. Sir Cecil's contributions were recognized posthumously when he was awarded the Order of the National Hero in 2018. His legacy endures, with the Cecil Wallace Whitfield Centre in Nassau serving as a testament to his impact on the nation's political landscape.
He led a revolution that shook the world and ruled a nation for decades. This is Fidel Castro. Born in 1926 in Biran, Cuba, Fidel was the son of a wealthy farmer. Despite privilege, he became aware of the inequality in his country and dreamed of change. Studying law in Havana, Castro became politically active, opposing the corrupt government of Fulgencio Batista. In 1953, He led the Moncada barracks attack, a failed attempt that landed him in prison, but marked the start of his revolutionary journey. After being released, he fled to Mexico, where he organized the 26th of July movement with Che Guevara. Landing in Cuba in 1956, Castro and his small band of rebels fought a grueling guerrilla war in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, gaining popular support against Batista. In 1959, Batista fled, and Castro took power. He implemented radical reforms, nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and promoting education and healthcare. His leadership polarized the world, earning admiration and criticism alike. Fidel Castro ruled Cuba for nearly 5 decades, leaving a complex legacy, a revolutionary who challenged imperialism, reshaped a nation, and became a symbol of defiance on the global stage.
Every nation has a voice that carried its people to freedom. For Antigua and Barbuda, that voice was Sir Vere Cornwall Bird. Born in 1910, Vere grew up watching workers struggle under colonial rule. He knew early on that his life's mission would be to fight for dignity and equality. He rose as a labor leader, giving workers a voice and demanding fair wages and justice. Fun fact: Vere started out as a stearine candle factory worker, and it was there he discovered the power of unity among laborists. With courage and vision, Vere Bird led his people step by step toward independence, and in 1981, Antigua and Barbuda finally stood free, with Vere as its very first Prime Minister. He was called the father of the nation not because of titles, but because of his love for his people and his dream of a brighter future. Sir Vere Cornwall Bird proved that one voice, joined with many, can build a nation. Some voices never fade. They heal, they inspire, they unite. Bob Marley was one of those voices. Born in Jamaica in 1945, Bob grew up poor but rich in spirit. Music became his way to fight pain with hope. With songs like One Love and Redemption Song, he preached unity, peace, and freedom. Fun fact: Bob Marley actually loved football so much that he would play matches with his bandmates before shows. Music and football were his two greatest passions. The heart. Even when illness came, Marley never stopped performing. He poured every beat of his soul into music, reminding the world that love is stronger than hate and hope louder than fear. Today, his voice still echoes across generations. Bob Marley didn't just make reggae famous, he made love and justice unforgettable. One world, one heart, one love. That was Bob Marley's gift to us all. He dreamed of a better life for his people and turned that dream into a nation's reality. This is Edward Oliver LeBlanc. Born in 1923 in Dominica, Edward grew up understanding the struggles of everyday citizens. From humble beginnings, he developed a deep commitment to justice and equality. LeBlanc became a teacher, a trade unionist, and eventually a politician, fighting tirelessly for the people. Fun fact: Edward was nicknamed the man of the people because he often visited villages on foot, personally listening to concerns before every major decision. He led Dominica to self-government and became the island's first premier in 1967. Under his leadership, education, infrastructure, and social programs improved. laying the foundation for a stronger, independent Dominica. Edward Oliver LeBlanc is remembered not just for politics, but for his compassion, humility, and unwavering dedication to his country. He showed the world that true leadership is not about power, it's about the heart. Every nation has a dreamer who dares to imagine freedom. For the Dominican Republic, that dreamer was Juan Pablo Duarte. Born in 1813 in Santo Domingo, Duarte grew up under colonial rule. But even as a young man, he believed his people deserved independence and dignity. He founded La Trinitaria, a secret movement of patriots dedicated to ending foreign domination and building a free Dominican nation. Fun fact: Duarte was not only a revolutionary, he was also a poet and philosopher, often writing verses about freedom and justice. Though he spent much of his life in exile, Duarte's ideas fueled the Revolution of 1844 that gave birth to the Dominican Republic. His vision was not just independence, but a nation built on unity, equality, and democracy. Today, Juan Pablo Duarte is honored as the father of the nation, a man who gave everything, even his own comfort, for his people's freedom. Duarte showed the world that the greatest revolutions start not with weapons, but with dreams. Some leaders rise not for themselves, but for the people. In Grenada, that leader was Maurice Bishop. Born in 1944, Bishop grew up in a working-class family. He studied law in London, but instead of chasing wealth, he returned home to fight for justice. In 1979, Bishop and his New Jewel movement led a peaceful revolution that overthrew dictatorship. For the first time, ordinary Grenadians felt real hope. Fun fact: Bishop was known for giving inspiring speeches without notes, speaking straight from the heart to his people. As Prime Minister, he invested in schools, healthcare, and workers' rights. Grenada's literacy soared, and people believed in a brighter future. But his leadership was cut short in 1983, when internal conflict led to his tragic death. Though his life ended too soon, Bishop remains a symbol of courage, hope, and the power of the people's voice. Maurice Bishop proved that true leadership doesn't come from power. It comes from love for your people. He was born into slavery, but rose to defeat empires. This is the story of Toussaint Louverture, the father of Haitian independence. Born in 1743 on a sugar plantation in Saint-Domingue, Toussaint started life in chains, but he was intelligent, self-taught, and driven by an unbreakable will for freedom. When the Haitian Revolution erupted in 1791, Toussaint became its leader. He was a master strategist, outsmarting both the French and the Spanish. Fun fact: Toussaint studied military tactics by reading Julius Caesar's writings and used that knowledge to outmaneuver professional European armies. He built an army of former enslaved people that defeated Napoleon's forces, the most powerful military in the world at the time. Toussaint didn't just fight for freedom. He built schools, restored agriculture, and dreamed of a self-sufficient Haiti. Though he was captured in 1802 and died in a French prison, his revolution lived on. In 1804, Haiti became the first free black republic in the world. Toussaint Louverture proved that even in the darkest chains, the dream of freedom can light a fire that no empire can ever extinguish. He rose from the sugar fields to become the voice of his nation. This is Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw. Born in 1916 in St. Kitts, Bradshaw started working on the sugar plantations as a teenager. He knew firsthand the struggles of ordinary workers. He joined the labor movement and quickly became a powerful union leader, fighting for better pay and dignity for workers. Fun fact: Bradshaw was such a strong speaker that locals nicknamed him Papa Bradshaw, because people felt he spoke like a father defending his children. Bradshaw entered politics and in 1966 became the first Premier of St. Kitts and Nevis. He worked tirelessly to expand education, healthcare, and social services, always keeping workers at the heart of his mission. Though he passed in 1978, before full independence, Bradshaw is remembered as a national hero, a man who carried the hopes of his people from the fields to the halls of power. Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw proved that leadership doesn't come from privilege, it comes from standing with your people. He was born on a small island, but his ideas changed the world. This is Sir Arthur Lewis. Arthur Lewis was born in 1915 in Castries, St. Lucia. From the start, he loved learning, and his brilliance carried him far beyond the Caribbean shores. He studied at the London School of Economics, becoming one of the very first black professors in British universities. Fun fact, Lewis was only 33 years old when he was made a full professor, a record that stunned the academic world. Arthur Lewis focused on how poor countries could grow their economies and lift people out of poverty. His dual-sector model became a foundation for development economics, guiding nations across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. As Lewis once said, "The fundamental cure for poverty is not money but knowledge." In 1979, he won the Nobel Prize in Economics, becoming the first black man ever to receive that honor. Today, St. Lucia's airport bears his name with pride. Sir Arthur Lewis proved that knowledge can be as powerful as any revolution, and that even the smallest island can give the world a giant. He was called the father of the nation. Eric Williams didn't just lead a country. He gave Trinidad and Tobago its independence. Born in 1911 in Port of Spain, Eric Williams was a brilliant student. He earned a scholarship to Oxford University, where he became a top historian. He wrote the groundbreaking book Capitalism and Slavery, showing how Europe's wealth was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. His words shook the world and gave Caribbean people pride in their history. In 1956, he founded the People's National Movement, promising self-government. By 1962, he achieved what once seemed impossible: independence for Trinidad and Tobago. Williams told his people, democracy means more, much more, than the right to vote once every 5 years. A reminder that freedom is a daily responsibility. Eric Williams served as Prime Minister until his death in 1981. To this day, he's remembered as the man who gave his people both knowledge and nationhood. Eric Williams, the scholar who turned history into independence. In Medellin, power didn't come from a gun. It came from a pen. Pablo Escobar knew that better than anyone. In the 1980s, Escobar ruled a billion-dollar empire. He could buy police, judges, even politicians. They called him El Patron, the boss. He made $420 million a week moving 15 tons of cocaine a day. But one day, he walked into a meeting with government officials. They wanted to arrest him. Escobar picked up a pen. He smiled and said, "I don't need a gun to change your life." Then he wrote a number, a bribe so big the official's hand shook. Escobar leaned in and whispered his rule. Plata o plomo. Silver or lead, take the money. Or take the bullet. Most took the silver, those who didn't, their names disappeared. In 1993, the man who used a pen to control a nation died on a Medellin rooftop with a gun in his hand and the world closing in. He wasn't a king by crown, but by courage. Joseph Chatoya was the Garifuna chief who fought for freedom. Born in St. Vincent in the 18th century, Chatoya grew up as a Garifuna leader at a time when European empires wanted to seize his people's land and break their spirit. He led his people in the First Carib War against the British, proving that courage could challenge empire. Fun fact, Chatoya worked with the French at times, showing he wasn't just a warrior but also a clever diplomat, who used alliances to protect his people. In 1795, during the Second Carib War, he united hundreds of Garifuna and other Vincentians in a final stand for independence. Though he was killed in battle, his leadership became legendary. Chatoya is remembered for declaring, Our land is not for sale. A. Promised that his people would never surrender their home. Today, Joseph Chatoya is honored as St. Vincent's national hero, a symbol of resistance, pride, and unity. Joseph Chatoya proved that even against empires, the spirit of freedom can never be defeated. He wasn't an angel. He wasn't a tyrant. He was a man who tried to save his country the only way he knew how, through faith, order, and unshakable will. Gabriel Garcia Moreno was born in 1821 in Quito. Ecuador was young, poor, and divided. He grew up watching chaos tear the nation apart, and swore one day he'd bring it peace. When he became president, the country had little hope. Moreno rebuilt what war had broken: roads, bridges, universities, hospitals. He founded the first observatory in South America and made education free for the poor. He believed discipline and belief in God could hold the country together. Fun fact: he was one of the first Latin American leaders to pay off foreign debt, without borrowing a cent. But order came with control. He made Catholicism the state religion and demanded unity through faith. He censored newspapers that attacked him and exiled those who plotted against him. To some, he was protecting Ecuador's soul. To others, he was limiting its voice. He once said, "Without God, there is no nation." To him, faith wasn't politics, it was protection. In 1875, after years of enemies and threats, he was attacked leaving church. Falling to the ground, he whispered, "Dios no muere." God does not die. Those words became his final legacy: faith, even in death. Gabriel Garcia Moreno left behind a nation that was stronger, smarter, and more united, but also deeply divided in how it remembered him. To some, he was the father who brought peace. To others, a ruler who held it too tightly. He was not good. He was not evil. He was human, and he built Ecuador from both his faith and his flaws.
Some heroes are remembered for how they fought. Miguel Grau is remembered for how he treated his enemies. He was born in 1834, in the small port city of Peta, Peru. From a young age he fell in love with the sea, not just the waves, but what they represented: freedom, courage, and destiny. By 9 years old, he was already sailing. Years later, when war came, the War of the Pacific, Miguel Grau commanded the legendary ship Huasca. While others sought glory, he sought honor. His crew loved him not for his power, but for his heart. He treated them like family. In battle, Grau sank enemy ships, but when the Chilean captain Arturo Prat died, Grau didn't celebrate. He collected Prat's body with respect, wrote a letter to his widow, and returned his sword with words of compassion. His quote, "Tell her her husband died like a brave man, fulfilling his duty." That letter turned a war hero into a legend of humanity. On October 8, 1879, the Huáscar was surrounded by Chilean ships. Miguel Grau stayed at his post.com as the sea he loved. A cannonball struck, and the gentleman of the seas was gone, but his spirit, it never sank. Today, Peru doesn't just remember Miguel Grau as a warrior, but as a man who proved that even in war, you can choose honor over hate. He fought with courage, he lived with kindness, and he died a true gentleman of the seas.
He wasn't born rich. He wasn't born lucky, but he was born with a ball at his feet. This is Diego Armando Maradona. Diego was born in 1960 in Villa Fiorito, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Argentina. Dirt streets, crowded homes, little food, big dreams. As a kid, he slept with a football. He said the ball was his only friend. By age 8, people already whispered his name, because no one had ever seen a child move like that. Football wasn't a game for Diego. It was his escape. Maradona made his professional debut at 15. Soon, the whole country watched him. In 1984, he joined Napoli, a club from Italy's poorest city. No one expected greatness. Then came the 1986 World Cup. Against England, Diego scored 2 goals. One controversial, one unforgettable. The hand of God. And the goal of the century. Argentina lifted the trophy. Maradona became a god to millions. But fame has a price. Pressure, addiction, loneliness. Drugs slowly took control of his life. Bans, scandals, pain. The same man who lifted a nation was falling apart. Yet fans never stopped loving him, because they saw themselves in him. Flawed, emotional, human. Maradona died in 2020. The world cried. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. From the slums to the world's biggest stadiums. Diego didn't just play football. He made people believe. And for millions, he will always be El Diego. He promised to save Chile. He ended up changing it forever. Some call him a hero, others a dictator. But everyone agrees, Augusto Pinochet left scars that still haven't healed. Born in 1915 in Valparaiso, Pinochet grew up dreaming of a military life. He rose through the ranks fast, disciplined, cold, precise. By the early 1970s, he was a respected general, far from politics. Or so it seemed. In 1973, Chile was in chaos, inflation, shortages, and political tension. Pinochet, once loyal to President Salvador Allende, turned his army against him. On September 11th, tanks rolled into Santiago. The palace burned, Allende died, and a new era began, one ruled by the uniform. Ioannis said, "If there must be a government of the sword," he said, "then let it be mine." For 17 years, Pinochet ruled with an iron fist. He crushed opposition, banned parties, and thousands were imprisoned, tortured, or vanished. Yet during the same years, Chile's economy grew, new industries, foreign investment, and the birth of modern Chile's market system. To some, he saved the country from collapse. To others, he destroyed its soul. In 1988, a national vote asked, should Pinochet stay in power? The people said no. It was the first peaceful step toward democracy in decades. He left office in 1990, not as a defeated man, but as one still believing history would justify him. Augusto Pinochet lived to 2006, defiant to the end. Never convicted, never apologetic. His name still divides Chilean families, classrooms, and hearts. Some leaders are remembered for their victories, others for their wounds. Pinochet for both. He was a writer who made reality feel like a dream. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the man who turned everyday life into magic. Born in 1927 in Aracataca, Colombia, Gabriel grew up listening to his grandmother's stories, tales of ghosts, miracles, and love that never died. Those stories shaped the way he saw the world. When he wrote 100 Years of Solitude, which became a TV show on Netflix, he didn't just tell a story. He created a whole universe. A place where time repeats itself, love lasts forever, and the impossible feels completely real. When the book was released, it sold out in just 1 week all across Latin America. Readers said it was the first time they saw their world written with such beauty. In 1982, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, bringing Latin American storytelling to the world stage. He once said, "What matters in life is not what happens to you, but what you remember and how you remember it." And that's what his books gave us. Memories that feel alive. Gabriel Garcia Marquez didn't just write about magic. He showed us that it's everywhere, in love, in family, and in the stories we pass on.
Some artists aren't celebrated in their lifetime, but their art shines forever. Frank Walter was one of those hidden geniuses. Born in 1926 in Antigua, Frank was brilliant, a painter, sculptor, poet, even a philosopher. But he was also misunderstood, often living in isolation while he created. He painted thousands of works, landscapes, portraits, even abstract cosmic visions. Fun fact, Frank Walter was also obsessed with science and even designed plans for his own solar-powered machine, long before it was popular. He lived much of his life away from crowds, in a small wooden house on a hill in Antigua, with just his art, his thoughts, and the sea around him. But in every brushstroke, he captured beauty, pain, and imagination. Only after his death in 2009 did the world begin to truly honor him. Today, his art has been displayed in major museums across the globe, from the Venice Biennale to London. Frank Walter proved that even in silence, creativity can echo across the world.
They called him the King, but he started as just a poor boy playing barefoot with a sock stuffed with newspaper. This is Pelé's story. Pelé was born Edson Arantes do Nascimento in 1940, in a small Brazilian town. His family was poor, too poor to buy a football. So he made his own out of rags and dreams. He once promised his father, "I will win you a World Cup." At just 15, Pelé joined Santos FC. By 17, he shocked the world. scoring twice in the 1958 World Cup final. Brazil cried, laughed, and sang his name. A legend was born wearing number 10. He didn't just win, he redefined football. 3 World Cups, over 1,000 goals. But Pelé's power wasn't just in his feet. It was in his smile, his joy, his heart. He showed the world that football could unite, heal, inspire. When he left the world in 2022, even the stadiums went silent. Because Pelé wasn't just the king of football, he was the king of dreams.
Wegen ihm streiten sich Spieler darum in jeder Mannschaft. Mit 17 Jahren das erste Mal bei einer WM dabei. Und im Finale schoss die Pille auch 2-mal rein. Hat 3-mal den WM-Titel in die Heimat gebracht. Es hat bis heute noch keiner geschafft.
Ja, was ist, du musst an dich glauben. In der Schule war's für Pelé nicht leicht, doch heute sehen sie ihn mit anderen Augen. 3-mal Weltmeister, hat's ihnen gezeigt, war der größte Spieler seiner Zeit.
He went from being a soldier to ruling a nation. Some called him a hero, others a dictator. This is the story of Desi Bouterse. Born in 1945 in Domburg, Suriname, Bouterse grew up during a time of great change. After Suriname gained independence from the Netherlands in 1975, he joined the army, but only 5 years later, he led a military coup that overthrew the government. He took control of the country, promising to end corruption and rebuild Suriname. But soon, fear began to rise. In 1982, 15 opponents of his rule were executed, an event known as the December Murders. It remains one of the darkest moments in Suriname's history. Bouterse stepped down in 1987, but he didn't disappear. Years later, he reinvented himself, this time as a politician. And in 2010, he was elected president. Yes, the same man who once led a coup was now chosen by the people. In 2019, he was convicted for the December Murders, but his supporters still called him a patriot, a man who fought for Suriname's independence and strength. Hero or tyrant, Desi Bouterse's name is written in Suriname's history forever. He wasn't born a king, but he led like one. His name was Kofi, the man who stood up to an empire. Kofi was born in Africa, taken from his homeland, and sold into slavery in what is now Guyana. He worked on a Dutch plantation near Berbice, forced to labor under brutal conditions. But inside him burned something stronger than fear, the dream of freedom. In 1763, Kofi led more than 2,500 enslaved Africans in a massive uprising against the Dutch. For a short, shining moment, he and his people took control of Berbice. He called himself Governor of the Negroes, and even tried to negotiate peace, a vision of a free Guyana, long before the world could imagine it. But the rebellion was crushed. Kofi was betrayed, and his dream ended in blood and silence. Yet his courage echoed through centuries, through every fight for independence, every call for justice. Today, Kofi stands as a symbol of freedom in Guyana, his statue rising proudly in Georgetown. He lost the battle, but he won the story, because Kofi taught a nation that freedom is worth everything. "500 years before Columbus, a Viking set sail across the freezing sea and found a new world. His name was Leif Erikson. Leif was born in Iceland around the year 970, the son of the legendary Eric the Red, who founded the first Viking colonies in Greenland. He grew up hearing stories of gods, warriors, and faraway lands, and by his 20s, Leif wanted to see them for himself. One day, he heard of a place west of Greenland, a land full of forests, grapes, and promise. So he set sail with his crew through storms and icebergs, guided only by courage and stars. After weeks at sea, they saw it, Vinland, the first European landing in North America. Leif built homes, explored rivers, and met native peoples. He called it Vinland the Good, a place rich in life and beauty. But the world wasn't ready for Vikings in America, and the colony didn't last. Still, Leif's legend grew. Today, he's remembered as the first European to set foot in the New World, a sailor who followed the wind farther than anyone before him. Leif Erikson, the Viking who found America, and proved that bravery sails beyond the map. He wasn't Irish. He was kidnapped, enslaved, and came back to save the very people who took him. This is the story of St. Patrick. Patrick was born in Britain around the year 385. When he was just 16, Irish raiders attacked his home. and took him across the sea as a slave. For 6 long years he tended sheep on cold mountains and found strength in faith. One night he dreamed of a voice saying, "Your ship is ready." Patrick escaped, walked hundreds of miles, and made it home. But soon he had another vision, a call from God asking him to return to Ireland, not for revenge, but to bring hope. He returned to the land that once enslaved him. He preached peace, kindness, and forgiveness, and converted thousands to Christianity. Legend says he used a shamrock to explain the Holy Trinity: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, 3 in 1. They say St. Patrick drove all the snakes from Ireland, but really, he drove out darkness, fear, and hate. Today, every March 17th, the world turns green. Not for gold or luck, but for a man who turned pain into purpose. St. Patrick, the slave who set a nation free. Imagine a mind so sharp it could see patterns where others saw chaos. That was Alan Turing. Born in 1912 in London. From a young age he was different. Not loud, not boastful, just quiet brilliance. He'd solve problems in minutes that left teachers stunned. When World War II broke out, Turing was called to a secret place, Bletchley Park. There he built a machine that could read the unbreakable German Enigma code. Every message cracked meant thousands of lives saved. But the world couldn't know his name. It was all top secret. After the war, he dreamed of something even bigger, a machine that could think. He wrote the ideas that became the blueprint for computers and artificial intelligence, before anyone else even imagined it. But genius often comes with pain. The world never understood him while he lived. He passed away young, only 41, but his mind changed everything. Today, every time your computer loads, your phone unlocks, or an AI answers your question, it's a whisper of Alan Turing's legacy. The 1400s. Most people believed the world ended where the sea met the sky. But a boy from Genoa, Italy, Christopher Columbus, dared to believe otherwise. He wasn't born rich. His father was a simple weaver. But young Columbus had something rare: imagination. He'd spend hours staring at the horizon, reading old maps, dreaming of lands beyond the ocean. As he grew older, his dream became an obsession. He believed he could reach Asia by sailing west, around the world. It sounded crazy, and for years no one believed him. He went to kings and queens across Europe, and every door closed. But Columbus didn't stop. Finally, in 1492, he found someone who would listen: Queen Isabella of Spain. She gave him 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. With those, he began his journey across the unknown. Weeks turned into months. The waves were endless. The sailors grew angry, afraid, ready to turn back. But Columbus held his ground. Hold on. Just one more day. Then one morning, a voice cried out, "Tierra, land!" They had done it. They had crossed the ocean. Columbus had found a new world, though he thought it was Asia. What he didn't know was that his discovery would change everything, forever. The meeting of 2 worlds, Europe and the Americas, would begin a new chapter in human history. Exploration, trade, culture, and sadly conquest and pain. Columbus became a symbol, loved by some, criticized by others. But no matter how you see him, one truth remains. He was a man who dared to dream when everyone else was afraid. From the boy who stared at the horizon, to the man who changed the map of the world. He once said, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain one when we grow up." That was Pablo Picasso, a man who never stopped seeing the world through the eyes of a child. Born in 1881 in Malaga, Spain, Picasso was drawing before he could even speak. His mother said his first word wasn't "mama." It was "pits," short for lapis, pencil. By the time he was 13, he could paint better than his father, who was an art teacher. But Picasso didn't just want to paint beautifully. He wanted to paint truth, not the world as it looked, but as it felt. When tragedy hit, the death of a close friend, Picasso entered his blue period. Paintings full of sadness, loneliness, and cold blue tones. He painted people forgotten by society, the poor, the lost, the broken. Then color returned. His rose period came, with circus performers, love, and warmth. And then he broke every rule of art. With Cubism, Picasso shattered faces and objects into sharp angles and new dimensions. It was like seeing the world through 1,000 mirrors. People said he was crazy. But Picasso wasn't crazy. He was ahead of his time. When war came to Spain, Picasso used his art to scream. His masterpiece, Guernica, wasn't just a painting. It was a cry against violence. a black, white, and gray storm of pain and chaos, showing the horror of war. Picasso lived to be 91. He never stopped painting, sculpting, and creating on over 50,000 works of art. He said, inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. And he worked every single day. When he died in 1973, the world lost an artist, but gained a legend. Because Pablo Picasso didn't just paint pictures, he painted emotion. He painted life. He showed us that art isn't just what you see, it's what you feel. Imagine leading a tiny country tucked between mountains, a nation hidden for centuries and shaping its future. That man was Oscar Ribas Reg. Born in 1936 in Andorra, Ribas Reg grew up seeing his country change. From a place of tradition and isolation, he dreamed of progress, democracy, and modern governance. In 1982, he became Andorra's first prime minister. It was a job with no roadmap, just vision, courage, and love for his people. He worked to modernize the economy, introduce reforms, and guide Andorra into a new era of politics. Ribas Reg believed in dialogue, in uniting a nation, and in building institutions that would last beyond his term. He wasn't a ruler who sought fame. He was a leader who sought stability and progress. Through challenges, debates, and change, he stood firm. And by the time he left office, Andorra had taken steps to become a modern democracy. A nation still small, but proud, strong, and respected. Today, Oscar Ribas Reg is remembered as the man who showed that even the tiniest nations can dream big, and that leadership is not about power, but about serving your people. Imagine leading a tiny country tucked between mountains, a nation hidden for centuries and shaping its future. That man was Oscar Ribas Reg. Born in 1936 in Andorra, Ribas Reg grew up seeing his country change. From a place of tradition and isolation, he dreamed of progress, democracy, and modern governance. In 1982, he became Andorra's first prime minister. It was a job with no roadmap, just vision, courage, and love for his people. He worked to modernize the economy, introduce reforms, and guide Andorra into a new era of politics. Ribas Reg believed in dialogue, in uniting a nation, and in building institutions that would last beyond his term. He wasn't a ruler who sought fame. He was a leader who sought stability and progress. Through challenges, debates, and change, he stood firm. And by the time he left office, Andorra had taken steps to become a modern democracy. A nation still small, but proud, strong, and respected. Today, Oscar Ribas Reg is remembered as the man who showed that even the tiniest nations can dream big, and that leadership is not about power, but about serving your people. He dreamed not of a crown, but of freedom. One man against empires, kings, and destiny itself. His name was Simón Bolívar, El Libertador. Born in 1783 in Caracas, Venezuela, Bolívar grew up surrounded by wealth, but haunted by loss. His parents died when he was a child, and from an early age he saw how Spain ruled Latin America with iron and greed. As a young man, he traveled to Europe, and there, standing in Rome, he swore an oath that he would not rest until his homeland was free. When revolution spread across the Americas, Bolívar rose, not for power, but for liberation. He led armies across impossible terrain, through jungles, deserts, and over the freezing Andes Mountains. His men called him El Libertador, the Liberator, because he freed nations: Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, the last one even bearing his name. Bolívar dreamed of one united Latin America, a single nation, strong and free. But divisions, politics, and ambition tore that dream apart. He once said, "Those who serve a revolution plow the sea." He gave everything, and yet saw his dream fade. In 1830, sick and alone, Bolívar died in exile, his dream unfinished. But centuries later, his spirit still lives, in every Latin flag that waves, in every voice that cries for freedom. Because Simón Bolívar didn't just free nations, he gave a continent its soul. France was breaking. Cities burned, armies fell, and hope was fading in the 100 Years' War. And then came a girl, not a soldier, not a noble, just Jeanne d'Arc, a farmer's daughter from Domremy. She was only 13 when she began to hear voices. She believed they were saints, telling her she had one mission: save France. Everyone laughed. A teenage girl leading an army? Impossible. But Joan's faith burned brighter than their doubt. She convinced the Dauphin, the future King Charles VII, to let her lead his troops. In shining armor, riding with a banner of lilies, she led men twice her age into battle, and they followed her because she made them believe again. At Orleans, she charged ahead when others hid. Arrows flew, cannons thundered, but Joan never stopped. And when France won, people said it was a miracle. The girl from the fields had become the Maid of Orleans. But miracles are dangerous in a world of power. Joan was captured, betrayed, and handed to her enemies. They accused her of heresy, of witchcraft, but really they feared her courage. At only 19, Joan was tied to a stake. As flames rose, she looked to the sky and cried, "Hold the cross high so I can see it through the flames." She died, but her voice never did. 25 years later, the church declared her innocent. And centuries later, she was made a saint. Today, Joan of Arc stands as a symbol of faith, bravery, and the power of believing in your purpose. Because even the smallest voice can change the course of history. There's a small piece of land at the edge of Europe, a place where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, called Gibraltar. And for decades, one man became its voice, its heart, its protector. His name was Sir Joshua Hassan. Born in 1915 in a humble Jewish family in Gibraltar, Joshua grew up knowing what it meant to belong to a small but proud community. He studied law, but his real calling was his people. When World War II came, Gibraltar's families were evacuated. Homes were empty, soldiers filled the streets, and fear filled the air. Hassan saw this and promised himself, one day, Gibraltar will stand on its own feet again. After the war, he entered politics, not for power, but for progress. He became Gibraltar's first chief minister in 1964, leading a territory that many thought couldn't survive on its own. But Joshua believed in Gibraltar's soul, in its culture, its courage, its right to choose its own future. When Spain tried to close its border, cutting off the rock from the world, Hassan didn't bow. He stood before Britain and the United Nations and said, "We are Gibraltarian, and we are proud." He worked day and night to build schools, homes, hospitals, and rights, turning Gibraltar from a fortress into a community. They called him the father of the Gibraltarian people, and when he walked through the streets, people didn't see a politician. They saw a neighbor, a friend, a man who never stopped believing in them. Sir Joshua Hassan passed away in 1997, but his legacy still echoes through every voice on the rock. Every flag that flies, every child that learns, every vote that says, "We are free and we are proud." He once said, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain one when we grow up." That was Pablo Picasso, a man who never stopped seeing the world through the eyes of a child. Born in 1881 in Malaga, Spain, Picasso was drawing before he could even speak. His mother said his first word wasn't mama. It was pits, short for lapis, pencil. By the time he was 13, he could paint better than his father, who was an art teacher. But Picasso didn't just want to paint beautifully. He wanted to paint truth, not the world as it looked, but as it felt. When tragedy hit, the death of a close friend, Picasso entered his blue period. Paintings full of sadness, loneliness, and cold blue tones. He painted people forgotten by society, the poor, the lost, the broken. Then color returned. His rose period came, with circus performers, love, and warmth. And then he broke every rule of art. With Cubism, Picasso shattered faces and objects into sharp angles and new dimensions. It was like seeing the world through 1,000 mirrors. People said he was crazy. But Picasso wasn't crazy. He was ahead of his time. When war came to Spain, Picasso used his art to scream. His masterpiece, Guernica, wasn't just a painting. It was a cry against violence, a black, white, and gray storm of pain and chaos, showing the horror of war. Picasso lived to be 91. He never stopped painting, sculpting, and creating on over 50,000 works of art. He said, inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. And he worked every single day. When he died in 1973, the world lost an artist, but gained a legend. Because Pablo Picasso didn't just paint pictures, he painted emotion. He painted life. He showed us that art isn't just what you see, it's what you feel. Once upon a time, Monaco was a small, quiet principality. A cliffside city with a castle, a casino, and a dream of becoming something more. And then came a man who would turn that dream into reality, Prince Rainier III. Born in 1923, Rainier was not just born into royalty, he was born into responsibility. When he became ruler in 1949, Monaco was struggling. Tourism was fading, money was tight, and people called it the poor man's paradise. But Rainier saw what others couldn't. He believed Monaco could shine, not as a place of power, but of beauty, culture, and possibility. So he transformed it. He built roads, gardens, museums, and businesses. He attracted artists, investors, and dreamers. And slowly, the Rock of Monaco began to glitter like never before. But even princes are human. And Rainier's greatest story wasn't political. It was love. In 1956, he met Grace Kelly, the Hollywood star known around the world. Their wedding became the fairy tale of the century. A prince and an actress turning real life into a movie. Together they brought elegance and warmth to Monaco. Grace's kindness and Rainier's strength made them the heart of the nation. Yet behind the glamour, there was also heartbreak. When Princess Grace tragically died in a car accident in 1982, Rainier was devastated. He never remarried. For the rest of his life, he carried her memory with him. In every speech, every garden, every moment of silence, Prince Rainier III ruled for 56 years, one of the longest reigns in European history. He turned a small principality into one of the most admired places on earth. And when he passed away in 2005, the people of Monaco didn't just lose a prince. They lost the man who built their dream, a leader, a husband, a builder of beauty. Prince Rainier III, the prince who turned Monaco into a story. In 1929, in the city of Frankfurt, Germany, a baby girl was born. Her name was Anneliese Marie Frank, but the world would know her simply as Anne Frank. When Anne was only 4, her family moved to Amsterdam, escaping the growing hate of Nazi Germany. For a few short years, she was just like any other child, laughing, going to school, and dreaming about becoming a writer or actress. But in 1940, the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. Life changed forever. Jewish families lost their rights, their jobs, their schools, their freedom. In 1942, when Anne turned 13, she received a simple birthday gift, a red checkered diary. Just weeks later, her sister Margot was called to a Nazi labor camp. That's when the Franks went into hiding, inside the secret annex, above her father's office. For over 2 years, Anne lived in silence. No sunlight, no friends, just the same 4 walls. But every night she wrote. She wrote about her fears, her dreams, her hope that people are really good at heart. Then in August 1944, betrayal. The secret annex was raided. Anne, her family, and the others were arrested. They were sent to concentration camps. Anne and her sister Margot were sent to Bergen-Belsen, where both died of typhus in early 1945, just weeks before the camp was liberated. She was only 15 years old. After the war, her father, Otto Frank, was the only survivor. When he read Anne's diary, he said, "I didn't know my little girl had such deep thoughts." He decided to share her words with the world. That diary, the diary of a young girl, has been translated into over 70 languages, read by millions, and taught in schools everywhere. Anne Frank never got to see peace, but her voice became stronger than hate itself. She dreamed of a world where kindness wins. And maybe, just maybe, we can make that dream real. Before jazz filled smoky bars, before blues touched broken hearts, there was one man who gave music its voice, Adolphe Sax. Born in 1814 in Belgium, Adolphe grew up surrounded by instruments. His father built them, and from a young age so did he. But his life was full of near-death experiences. He fell from high places, was burned, poisoned, even hit by stones. Yet somehow, he survived every time. People said he was too stubborn to die. In his 20s, he had a dream, to create an instrument that could sing like the human voice. Not quite brass, not quite woodwind, but something new. After years of work, in 1846, he invented it. The saxophone. The world had never heard a sound like it before. But not everyone was happy. Rivals in Paris tried to ruin him. They mocked him, copied his work, and dragged him into court. He lost everything, money, fame, friends, but never his passion. Then came redemption. Military bands adopted his invention. The sax spread across Europe, and decades later, it would become the heart of jazz, blues, and modern music. Adolphe Sax died in 1894 with little wealth, but a legacy that would echo forever. Every time a saxophone plays, you can still hear the voice of the man who gave music its soul. A 70-year-old warrior, an island under siege, and an empire determined to destroy it. This is the story of Jean de Valette. Jean de Valette was born in 1495 in France. At a young age, he joined the Knights of St. John, a religious military order sworn to defend Christianity in the Mediterranean. For decades, he fought at sea against pirates and powerful empires. At one point, he was even captured and forced into slavery. But he survived and returned to the fight. In 1565, the Ottoman Empire launched a massive invasion of Malta. Around 30,000 soldiers arrived to crush the island and the knights. The defenders had barely 9,000 men. Jean de Valette was already 70 years old, but he refused to abandon his people. He walked the fortress walls every day, encouraging soldiers, organizing defenses, and preparing for battle. For months, cannons thundered and fortresses fell. Thousands died. But de Valette refused to surrender. Against all expectations, the knights and Maltese defenders held out until reinforcements finally arrived. The Ottoman army withdrew. Malta was saved. After the siege, de Valette knew the island needed stronger defenses. He ordered the construction of a new fortified capital. That city would become Valletta, named in his honor. Jean de Valette died in 1568, only a few years after the siege. But his courage changed history. One determined leader, one island that refused to fall, and a legacy that still stands in the stone walls of Valletta today. A 70-year-old warrior, an island under siege, and an empire determined to destroy it. This is the story of Jean de Valette. Jean de Valette was born in 1495 in France. At a young age, he joined the Knights of St. John, a religious military order sworn to defend Christianity in the Mediterranean. For decades, he fought at sea against pirates and powerful empires. At one point, he was even captured and forced into slavery. But he survived and returned to the fight. In 1565, the Ottoman Empire launched a massive invasion of Malta. Around 30,000 soldiers arrived to crush the island and the knights. The defenders had barely 9,000 men. Jean de Valette was already 70 years old, but he refused to abandon his people. He walked the fortress walls every day, encouraging soldiers, organizing defenses, and preparing for battle. For months, cannons thundered and fortresses fell. Thousands died. But de Valette refused to surrender. Against all expectations, the knights and Maltese defenders held out until reinforcements finally arrived. The Ottoman army withdrew. Malta was saved. After the siege, de Valette knew the island needed stronger defenses. He ordered the construction of a new fortified capital. That city would become Valletta, named in his honor. Jean de Valette died in 1568, only a few years after the siege. But his courage changed history. One determined leader, one island that refused to fall, and a legacy that still stands in the stone walls of Valletta today. In a tiny country at the heart of Europe, a young woman would become a symbol of hope. Her name was Charlotte. Born in 1896, shy, quiet, and never expecting to rule. But everything changed in 1919. After political chaos and the abdication of her sister, Charlotte stepped forward and became Grand Duchess of Luxembourg at just 22 years old. The people didn't choose her because she was loud. They chose her because she was steady, calm, and full of heart. For years, she worked to modernize her country. Workers' rights, women's protections, new schools. Charlotte believed Luxembourg should grow, not just survive. But the true test came in 1940, when the Nazis invaded. Many leaders surrendered. Charlotte refused. She fled with her family, but not to hide. She traveled the world, speaking on radio broadcasts, reminding her people, Luxembourg will never accept tyranny. Her voice became a lifeline for a nation living in fear. In America, Canada, and the UK, she raised support for her suffering country. Soldiers carried her picture. Parents told their children, stay strong. Charlotte hasn't given up. And when Luxembourg was finally liberated, crowds filled the streets. They weren't cheering for an army. They were cheering for her, their Grand Duchess who never abandoned them. After the war, she led Luxembourg into a new age, stronger, richer, more united than ever before. And in 1964, after 45 years of service, she peacefully stepped down, leaving the throne to her son. Grand Duchess Charlotte passed away in 1985. But in Luxembourg, she is still remembered as the heart of the nation. A woman who didn't rule with fear, but with courage, dignity, and love. And sometimes, the strongest leaders are the ones who choose hope over power. Albert Einstein was one of the most important scientists in history. Born in 1879 in Germany, he completely changed how we understand space, time, and the universe. Einstein wasn't a normal genius as a kid. He talked late, didn't like school rules, and preferred thinking quietly by himself. But he was extremely curious, always wondering why things worked the way they did. Einstein created the theory of relativity, including the famous equation E, mc2. This idea changed physics forever and helped inspire modern technology like GPS, lasers, and even parts of nuclear science. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921 for explaining the photoelectric effect, another huge breakthrough. Einstein escaped Nazi Germany and moved to the United States. He taught at Princeton University, wrote books, and became a public voice for peace and human rights. Even though he became world famous, Einstein lived simply and cared more about learning than anything else. Einstein showed that imagination and curiosity can change the world. When Einstein died in 1955, the doctor performing his autopsy, Thomas Harvey, removed Einstein's brain without permission at first. Harvey believed studying it could reveal why Einstein was so intelligent. He preserved the brain, sliced it into 240 pieces, and photographed it. Years later, scientists discovered that some areas linked to math and reasoning had more folds and extra connections than average. Einstein's family was upset at first, but eventually allowed the research as long as it was used only for science. The story became famous because it showed how the world wanted to understand the mind behind the genius. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, one of the greatest musical geniuses to ever live, a boy who could compose before he could even write a full sentence. This is his story, from child prodigy to legend. Mozart was born in 1756 in Salzburg, Austria. From the age of 3, he showed an incredible gift for music. By 5, he was composing small pieces. By 6, he was performing for emperors and kings. His father, Leopold Mozart, traveled with him across Europe. Mozart played the harpsichord blindfolded, amazed royal audiences, and even composed on the spot. People called him the miracle boy. As he grew older, Mozart never stopped learning. He mastered the violin, the piano, and studied every style of music he heard during his travels. But life wasn't easy. Even with all his talent, he struggled to find a stable job. He wanted freedom, to write the music he felt in his heart, not just what royals demanded. So Mozart set out on his own, determined to make a name for himself. In Vienna, Mozart began creating masterpieces that changed music forever. The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, The Magic Flute, operas filled with emotion, humor, and life. He wrote more than 600 works, symphonies, sonatas, concertos, and choral pieces that are still performed today. He could compose an entire symphony in his head before writing a single note. Music flowed through him like water. A fun fact, Mozart's hearing was so sharp. He once corrected a mistake in a church choir after hearing it one time. Despite his brilliance, Mozart often struggled with money. He wasn't paid fairly, and his free-spirit lifestyle made things even harder. In 1791, at only 35 years old, Mozart fell seriously ill while finishing his famous Requiem. He didn't live to complete it. His students finished the last sections using his notes. Mozart left this world young, but his music never died. Every concert hall, every piano lesson, every symphony played today carries his legacy. He wasn't just a composer. He was a spark of pure human genius, a reminder of how powerful one person's imagination can be. This is the story of a man who witnessed horror and turned it into hope. A man whose compassion changed the entire world. His name was Henry Dunant. In 1859, Dunant traveled to Solferino, Italy on a business trip. But what he found wasn't meetings. It was a battlefield. 40,000 wounded and dying soldiers were left with no help. No doctors, no medicine, no water. Men from both sides crying out in pain. Henry couldn't walk away. So he ran into the chaos, gathered villagers, and said the words that would echo through history. Tutti fratelli. We are all brothers. No matter their uniform, he helped every wounded soldier. That day changed him forever. When Dunant returned home, he wrote a book describing the nightmare he witnessed. It shocked Europe. His idea was simple, but revolutionary. What if there was a neutral organization whose only purpose was to help the wounded, no matter the country? From that idea came the International Red Cross and the Geneva Convention, worldwide rules that protect victims of war. For the first time in history, compassion became international law. But Dunant's life wasn't perfect. His business collapsed. He went bankrupt. He spent years alone, forgotten, living in poverty. Yet he never regretted what he did. He once said, "My real wealth is the lives saved." In 1901, at 73 years old, Dunant received the very first Nobel Peace Prize. The world finally honored the man who believed kindness could be stronger than war. He died in 1910, with a small Red Cross pin beside his bed. Henry Dunant proved that one ordinary person, with extraordinary compassion, can change history. Because of him, millions of lives have been saved. Because of him, help arrives even in the darkest moments. He didn't just witness suffering, he transformed it into hope. This is the story of a man who rose from poverty to become a dictator who changed Italy forever, for better and for worse. His name was Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was born in 1883 in a small Italian village. His family was poor. His father a blacksmith, his mother a school teacher. Young Benito was smart, fiery, and constantly in trouble. He loved speeches, loved attention, and believed he was destined for something big. After World War I, Italy was struggling. People were hungry. Jobs were disappearing. Chaos filled the streets. Mussolini saw an opportunity. He promised strength. He promised discipline. He promised to restore Italy's greatness. People, desperate for order, listened. In 1922, Mussolini and his supporters marched toward Rome. The government, weak and scared, gave in. At just 39 years old, he became Prime Minister of Italy. At first, some Italians believed he brought stability. Trains ran on time, streets felt safer, and he created jobs through huge building projects. But beneath that order, something darker was growing. Mussolini slowly destroyed democracy. He censored newspapers. He banned political opponents. He created a secret police force that arrested and tortured critics. Italy became a totalitarian state, his state. He called himself Il Duce, the leader. Crowds cheered, but many lived in fear. And then, he made his most devastating decision. He aligned Italy with Nazi Germany during World War II. That alliance brought suffering, war, and death to millions, including Italians themselves. As the war turned against him, Mussolini lost support. In 1943, he was overthrown and arrested. He tried to escape in 1945, but was captured and executed by Italian partisans. His body was hung publicly, a symbol of the destruction his regime caused. Mussolini's story is a warning of how quickly fear can turn into obedience, how desperation can elevate a strong voice, and how a nation can lose its freedom without realizing it. His legacy isn't one of glory. It's a reminder that leadership without compassion becomes tyranny. This is the story of a humble stonecutter who escaped persecution, climbed a mountain, and founded one of the world's oldest republics. His name was Saint Marinus. Marinus was born around the year 275 on the island of Rab, today in Croatia. He was a simple man, a stonemason, someone nobody expected to change history. But he lived during a dangerous time. Christians were hunted across the Roman Empire, and Marinus was one of them. To survive, Marinus fled across the sea to Italy. He worked quietly, carving stones, rebuilding walls, helping local communities. But he wanted more than safety. He wanted a place where people could live freely, without fear, without oppression. So he kept walking, up into the mountains. On Mount Titano, Marinus built a small stone shelter. Nothing special, just a place to pray, work, and live in peace. But soon, people began joining him. People looking for freedom, fairness, and safety. Marinus welcomed them all. He told them, "I leave you free from every man." Those words became the foundation of a new community. A community that would become San Marino, the oldest surviving republic in the world. Marinus died in the early 4th century, but the people kept his promise of freedom alive. His tiny mountain settlement grew into a nation that outlasted kings, emperors, wars, and kingdoms. While countries around it rose and fell, San Marino survived, protected by its ideals of neutrality, peace, and independence. And even today, over 700 years later, the country still honors the humble stonecutter who started it all. Saint Marinus never wanted power. He wanted freedom, not just for himself, but for everyone who followed him. From a mountain hut to a republic that still stands, his story reminds us that the greatest nations aren't always built by soldiers or kings, but sometimes by quiet, humble people who simply refuse to live in fear. He was a pope who traveled the world, a man who faced suffering without fear, and a voice that spoke to millions. His name was Pope John Paul II. He was born in 1920 in Poland as Karol Józef Wojtyła. His childhood was marked by loss. His mother died when he was just 9. His brother died a few years later, and by 21, he lost his father too. Left completely alone, Karol learned strength through pain. Sports, poetry, and faith helped him survive and shape the man he would become. During World War II, Nazi forces occupied Poland. Karol worked in a stone quarry by day and secretly studied to become a priest by night. He risked his life not with weapons, but with hope. In 1978, something historic happened. Karol Wojtyła became Pope John Paul II, the first non-Italian pope in over 450 years. He refused to stay behind Vatican walls. He traveled more than any pope before him, meeting people where they were, the poor, the sick, the forgotten. In 1981, he was shot in an assassination attempt. The world watched in shock. But later, Pope John Paul II did something unforgettable. He visited the man who shot him and forgave him. Even as illness slowly weakened his body, his spirit never faded. He showed the world that dignity doesn't disappear with suffering. Pope John Paul II died in 2005. Millions gathered, grieving a man who had walked with them through history. He once said, "Do not be afraid." Those words became his legacy, a reminder that courage, compassion, and hope can change the world, even in its darkest moments. A 70-year-old warrior, an island under siege, and an empire determined to destroy it. This is the story of Jean de Valette. Jean de Valette was born in 1495 in France. At a young age, he joined the Knights of St. John, a religious military order sworn to defend Christianity in the Mediterranean. For decades, he fought at sea against pirates and powerful empires. At one point, he was even captured and forced into slavery. But he survived and returned to the fight. In 1565, the Ottoman Empire launched a massive invasion of Malta. Around 30,000 soldiers arrived to crush the island and the knights. The defenders had barely 9,000 men. Jean de Valette was already 70 years old, but he refused to abandon his people. He walked the fortress walls every day, encouraging soldiers, organizing defenses, and preparing for battle. For months, cannons thundered and fortresses fell. Thousands died, but de Valette refused to surrender. Against all expectations, the knights and Maltese defenders held out until reinforcements finally arrived. The Ottoman army withdrew. Malta was saved. After the siege, de Valette knew the island needed stronger defenses. He ordered the construction of a new fortified capital. That city would become Valletta, named in his honor. Jean de Valette died in 1568, only a few years after the siege. But his courage changed history. One determined leader, one island that refused to fall, and a legacy that still stands in the stone walls of Valletta today. He never wrote a book. He never claimed to be the smartest man in the room. Yet he became one of the most influential thinkers in history. This is Socrates. Socrates was born around 470 BC in Athens, Greece. His father was a stonemason and his mother was a midwife. He lived simply, often walking barefoot through the city, talking with anyone who would listen. But Socrates wasn't interested in wealth or fame. He was interested in truth. Instead of giving lectures, Socrates asked questions. Simple questions like, what is justice? What is courage? What does it mean to live a good life? By asking questions again and again, he forced people to think deeply about their beliefs. This method became known as the Socratic method, and it is still used in schools and universities today. One of his most famous ideas was, the unexamined life is not worth living. But not everyone liked what Socrates was doing. Some powerful people felt embarrassed when he questioned their ideas. In 399 BC, he was put on trial in Athens. They accused him of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. He was found guilty. Instead of escaping, Socrates accepted the sentence. Death by drinking poison hemlock. Socrates died, but his ideas did not. His students, especially Plato, wrote down his teachings and spread them across the world. More than 2,000 years later, Socrates is still remembered as the man who taught humanity one powerful lesson. True wisdom begins when we admit how little we actually know. For more than 4 decades, one leader shaped the direction of a small Balkan nation. His name was Enver Hoxha, and he led the country of Albania through a unique period of its history. Hoxha was born in 1908 in the city of Gjirokastër. As a young man, he studied abroad in places like Paris and Brussels, where he became interested in political ideas and movements that were spreading across Europe. These experiences helped shape his views about government and society. Rise to leadership, 031 DOS. During World War II, Albania was occupied by foreign forces. Hoxha helped organize resistance groups that fought during the war. After the conflict ended in 1944, the communist movement took power in Albania, and Hoxha became the country's main leader. Under Hoxha's leadership, Albania followed a communist system. The government focused on industry, agriculture, and building a strong national identity. During this time, Albania also chose to follow an independent path in world politics, sometimes changing alliances and focusing on self-reliance. Across the country, many defensive bunkers were built as part of national security planning. Hoxha remained Albania's leader for many years, guiding the country through the Cold War period and major global changes. He continued to influence Albania's political direction until his death in 1985. Today, Enver Hoxha remains an important historical figure in the story of Albania, representing a long era that shaped the nation's modern history. A ruler, a bishop, and one of the greatest poets in the Balkans. His words shaped a nation's identity. This is Petar II Petrović Njegoš. He was born in 1813 in the mountains of Montenegro, a small but fiercely independent land in the Balkans. As a young boy named Radivoje, he grew up surrounded by tribal traditions, poetry, and stories of freedom. His uncle, the ruler Petar I Petrović Njegoš, saw great potential in him and prepared him to lead. At only 17 years old, he became the ruler and Prince Bishop of Montenegro. This meant he held both political and religious authority over the country. Despite his young age, Njegoš worked to strengthen Montenegro's unity, organize its government, and bring education and culture to his people. But Njegoš was not only a leader, he was also a brilliant writer. His most famous work, The Mountain Wreath, became one of the most important pieces of literature in the South Slavic world. Through poetry, he explored ideas about freedom, honor, faith, and the struggle of small nations to survive. Even today, his words are studied and quoted across the Balkans. Njegoš ruled during a time when Montenegro was surrounded by powerful empires. Yet he helped preserve the country's independence and cultural identity. He died young in 1851 at just 37 years old. Today, Petar II Petrović Njegoš is remembered not only as a leader, but as a philosopher and poet, a man whose words and vision helped define the spirit of Montenegro. A ruler, a bishop, and one of the greatest poets in the Balkans. His words shaped a nation's identity. This is Petar II Petrović Njegoš. He was born in 1813 in the mountains of Montenegro, a small but fiercely independent land in the Balkans. As a young boy named Radivoje, he grew up surrounded by tribal traditions, poetry, and stories of freedom. His uncle, the ruler Petar I Petrović Njegoš, saw great potential in him and prepared him to lead. At only 17 years old, he became the ruler and Prince Bishop of Montenegro. This meant he held both political and religious authority over the country. Despite his young age, Njegoš worked to strengthen Montenegro's unity, organize its government, and bring education and culture to his people. But Njegoš was not only a leader, he was also a brilliant writer. His most famous work, The Mountain Wreath, became one of the most important pieces of literature in the South Slavic world. Through poetry, he explored ideas about freedom, honor, faith, and the struggle of small nations to survive. Even today, his words are studied and quoted across the Balkans. Njegoš ruled during a time when Montenegro was surrounded by powerful empires. Yet he helped preserve the country's independence and cultural identity. He died young in 1851 at just 37 years old. Today, Petar II Petrović Njegoš is remembered not only as a leader, but as a philosopher and poet, a man whose words and vision helped define the spirit of Montenegro. More than 1,000 years ago, a leader united the Croatian lands and became the first king of a new kingdom. His name was Tomislav of Croatia. Tomislav lived in the early 900s and ruled the Croatian lands as a powerful duke. During this time, the region faced threats from strong neighboring powers, including the Bulgarian Empire and influences from the Byzantine Empire. Tomislav worked to unite different Croatian territories and strengthen their defenses. Around the year 925, Tomislav was crowned King of Croatia. This moment marked the creation of the Kingdom of Croatia, making Tomislav the first Croatian king in history. Under his leadership, Croatia became stronger and more organized. Historical sources say Tomislav commanded a powerful army and navy for the time. He protected the kingdom from invasions and helped maintain independence in a region filled with competing empires. His leadership helped Croatia become an important state in medieval Europe. King Tomislav's reign became a symbol of unity and strength for the Croatian people. Even today, statues, squares, and monuments across Croatia honor his memory. More than 1,000 years later, Tomislav of Croatia is still remembered as the king who helped build the foundation of the Croatian state. In the 20th century, one leader helped unite many different peoples into one country. His name was Josip Broz Tito, the longtime leader of Yugoslavia. Tito was born in 1892 in the village of Kumrovec in what is now Croatia. He grew up in a modest family and worked many different jobs as a young man. These early experiences shaped his understanding of ordinary people and their struggles. During World War II, Tito led the Yugoslav partisans, one of the most successful resistance movements in Europe. His forces fought bravely against occupying armies and helped free Yugoslavia from foreign control. Because of this leadership, many people saw him as a national hero. After the war, Tito became the leader of Yugoslavia, a country made up of several different nations including Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and Montenegro. He worked to keep peace and unity among these groups and helped the country develop industry, education, and infrastructure. He also helped create the non-aligned movement, allowing Yugoslavia to stay independent during the Cold War. Josip Broz Tito led Yugoslavia for more than 35 years. During his rule, many people remember a time of stability, international respect, and unity between different cultures. When he died in 1980, leaders from all over the world came to honor him, showing how important he had become on the global stage. Some writers changed the way people see the world. One of those writers was Franz Kafka, a quiet man whose strange and powerful stories became famous around the world. Kafka was born in 1883 in the city of Prague, which was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He grew up in a German-speaking Jewish family and studied law at university. Although he worked an office job during the day, writing stories was his true passion. Kafka's stories were very unusual. They often showed characters trapped in confusing and mysterious situations. One of his most famous works, The Metamorphosis, tells the story of a man who wakes up one morning and discovers he has turned into a giant insect. Another famous novel, The Trial, follows a man who is arrested but never told what crime he committed. These strange stories explored themes like fear, loneliness, and the struggle to understand the world. Here is an interesting fact. Kafka actually wanted most of his writing destroyed after his death. But his close friend Max Brod believed the stories were too important to disappear, so he published them instead. Because of that decision, the world was able to discover Kafka's incredible work. Today, Franz Kafka is considered one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. His unique style was so powerful that the word Kafkaesque is now used to describe strange, confusing, and surreal situations. From a quiet writer in Prague to a literary legend, Kafka's stories continue to inspire readers all around the world.